The water has run out in Crimea. What happens next? Even if stones fall from the sky, we're still at home. Dried up rivers, depleted reservoirs, and no water coming from the tap. These are the very stones from the sky that the supporters of the Russian Federation's annexation of the peninsula talked about. And now, the few remaining wells are being taken away from Crimeans. There are plans to use wastewater. Residents are being supplied with rusty water on a strict schedule, and they're even being offered to shoot at clouds. Of course, they're blaming the hated Ukraine for the water crisis, since it blocked the North Crimean Canal, the peninsula's main water artery. Let us set aside the usual trolling for just a moment. Even though it is perfectly clear that Russia has stolen a suitcase without a handle, and dig deeper to understand the most significant development that has already happened to Crimea, but which very few people see or fully understand yet. Electricity, gas, food supplies, transportation, all these problems pale in comparison to the main, fundamental issue: water. Water is not just for drinking, doing laundry, and washing. It's not just about factories, sewage systems, and agriculture. After World War II, the population of Crimea was 379,000 people. Of course, that's taking into account the fact that the entire Crimean Tatar population had been deported before that. And yet, consider this number: 379,000 compared to today's approximately 2.5 million. The reason for the sparse population of post-war Crimea is simple. Only a narrow coastal strip and the foothills of the Crimean mountains were settled. Because only here did precipitation accumulate in the mountains, which, through springs and rivers flowing down to the coast and into the valleys, provided people with the fresh water they needed to survive. The rest of the territory was comprised of vast saline steppes, which were not only unsuitable for agriculture, but even for the barest human existence. Since there was absolutely no fresh water to be found in the steppe regions of Crimea, none at all, in the wells and boreholes there was only brine. In fact, just as one would expect on a dry and hot island, surrounded on all sides by the sea. Dear viewers, please support our channel on the Patreon platform. The link is in the suggestions, on the screen, and in the video description. And then the North Crimean Canal came to Crimea. Well, came is one way to put it. First, the Kakhovka Reservoir was built on the Dnipro River. This project became a real tragedy for the lives of tens of thousands of Ukrainians whose homes ended up at the bottom of the Kakhovka Reservoir. It is believed that the North Crimean Canal was one of the most logical reasons to transfer the peninsula to Ukraine. This eliminated confusion in the project's management hierarchy and its funding. It's simpler this way, they said in the Kremlin as they handed Crimea over to Ukraine, although there was nothing simple about it, because in addition to the canal, it was necessary to create utility and economic infrastructure on the peninsula almost from scratch. According to some sources, at that time there were only 29 grocery stores serving all of Crimea. After the construction of the Kakhovka Reservoir, the canal itself and a cascade of pumping stations were built, and then an irrigation network was set up. After nearly 2 decades of construction, staggering financial expenses, the steppe Crimea began to be flushed with 1 cubic kilometer of water per year. That's 1 billion tons. There is a term for this, it's called soil desalination. If you continuously pour fresh water on salt flats for a long period of time, the salts will gradually be leached out of the soil, and a dome of fresh water will form above the underground brines, preventing the process of reverse capillary salinization. The soil will become suitable for agricultural use, and some of the fresh water from the dome can be drawn for drinking water supply. This means that you can cultivate fields, orchards and vineyards, build villages, and bring in people. This is exactly what happened in Crimea. With the construction of the North Crimean Canal, a massive program began to desalinate the soils and transform them into arable land and vineyards. Tens of thousands of settlers came from Ukraine, mostly grain growers and livestock breeders. The population of Crimea began to grow rapidly. 800 villages and settlements in the steppe region of Crimea received autonomous water supply. 800 villages! And of course there was an explosive growth in industry. All the major enterprises in Crimea owe their growth, or even their very existence, to the water from the North Crimean Canal. Because factories are not just production facilities, often with high consumption of technical fresh water, but also people, thousands, tens and even hundreds of thousands of people who must be able to live normally, to drink, eat, bathe, do laundry and, use the toilet. Simply put, to constantly use fresh water. And so, with Ukraine, Crimea became a flourishing oasis with developed agriculture and industry. Then came the year 2014. The North Crimean Canal was completely closed off, but the population of Crimea still remained, the industry remained, and water consumption stayed almost exactly at the 2013 level. Except for some agricultural areas that relied on artificial irrigation systems. Crimea began to rapidly deplete its reserves of fresh water, which had been accumulated over decades. Reservoirs are being emptied, and the remaining fresh water is being recklessly drilled for and pumped out from areas where it had formed over 50 years thanks to the canal's flow and systematic irrigation. And of course, the first warning signs immediately appeared. Here and there, wells began to produce salty water, and in some places, brine has already started to show up. What's more, the reservoirs have started to shallow at an alarming rate. The science of hydrogeology states that without a massive influx of fresh water, Crimea will inevitably return to its original saline state because capillary rise of brines will gradually salinize the freshwater lenses, making them unusable. But this process takes about 12 to 15 years, unless, of course, it is accelerated. But the Russian authorities have accelerated this process by about 3 times. And now today we see the results of this in Crimea. And now to the main point. What will people in the 800 rural settlements of Crimea do when the salt flats return around them and not only wheat and grapes, but even shrubby acacia can no longer grow? What exactly are these people going to drink? What will Crimeans in the cities drink when the reservoirs are drained and completely emptied and brine irreversibly begins to fill up the local wells? I won't even talk about industry, it's already clear enough. Crimea is doomed to return to the distant year 1947, when the population of 379,000 people, with their extremely modest needs at the time, had more than enough water. The time machine, creaking, has rushed 60 years into the past, and the Crimeans are its unfortunate passengers. I hope we all understand that no water pipelines from Russia, even if they are built, can compare to the capacity of diverting water from the Dnipro, from which about 20% of the flow of this great river was taken for Crimea's needs. Therefore, there will be no flooding of the salt flats, so refer to what was said above. It is foolish to blame Ukraine for the current situation. The North Crimean Canal will only be filled with water after the complete deoccupation of the peninsula. According to the Geneva Convention, the occupying country is responsible for all humanitarian needs of the civilian population. Russia is obliged to provide water supply to Crimean residents by all possible means, and the simplest way is to officially request it from Ukraine, thereby recognizing itself as a country that has occupied the territory of an independent state. But Russia prefers only to barbarically destroy the nature of Crimea, draining the last of its water, drying up rivers and reservoirs. The flourishing oasis created by Ukraine over 60 years was destroyed by the Russians in 6. Crimea will inevitably become deserted. On this scorched steppe, all that will remain is a military base with rusty missiles and an antiquated fleet. The military will have enough of the water that flows down from the mountains, but all the other Crimean supporters should prepare for hard times, surviving in a desert, becoming environmental refugees, or running across the Crimean bridge with a bucket, feeling the deepest gratitude to the Russian Federation and personally to Vladimir Putin. What the Russian leadership is doing to the Ukrainian peninsula is undoubtedly a crime. Even in Russia's own criminal law, there is the concept of ecocide, a crime against peace and the security of humanity, as stipulated in Article 358 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. Ecocide is legally defined as the mass destruction of plant or animal life, the poisoning of the atmosphere or water resources, as well as various other deliberate actions capable of causing an environmental catastrophe. This crime is strictly punishable by a sentence of imprisonment for a term of 12 to 20 years. So it's not even necessary to take Putin straight to The Hague to be tried for war crimes. A 20-year sentence for ecocide would be enough for him to serve time in Russia to start with.